Hello everyone, Daniel again. For the past week and a half, we have been looking at discussing the 9 drivers of studio growth and using a framework that a really important marketer, someone whose books have been very important to me, whose teachings have been very important to me, we've been looking at his framework and applying it to the world of music lessons, music studios, music schools, not one particular type of instrument, all types of instruments, and looking at the ramifications and the implications of these 9 drivers on what we do. Oftentimes, it's easy to fall into the trap of believing that if you want to grow revenue, you want to grow student numbers, you want to grow in size, that the lever to do that is marketing. That is just not true. There's more than just marketing, and there's 9 of them, and we've gone over them the last week and a half. Today, we are covering the last 2. And I want to tell you what we're going to cover in this video. In this video, I'm going to, and this is kind of shocking, I'm going to tell you why I paid $3,000 to sit down with a business consultant and how I got an enormous amount of value out of that sit down, out of that coaching from that business consultant. Sat down with him for one day, and there were some other things that were part of the package, but I got an enormous amount of value out of that and what I learned. So I'm going to share that in this video. Second thing, some of my favorite business quotes, including one by Will Smith. Quotes are really inspiring to me. Hope these will be inspiring to you as well. But it's not just for your intellectual entertainment. Within the context of what we're going to talk about today, these quotes, I think, can provide a new distinction, can provide new insight into what you have to do as a studio owner and as a school owner. Third thing, and that is the real reason you're stuck in your studio and why I was stuck in my studio, stuck in marketing, in enrollment, in customer relations, in innovation, in group lessons, in preschool programs, homeschoolers, like all these areas where we can be stuck as music school, music studio owners. I want to tell you the real reason why that's the case, and that is the 9th insight. So the 8th leverage point, the 8th driver of studio growth, music school growth is your processes and systems. Now, last week I talked a little bit about assets and how systems can be an asset in your studio, and I mentioned and talked a little bit about processes and systems at that time as an asset. In this video, I want to go into a little bit more about what that actually means. So W. Edwards Deming was an industrialist and someone that business people look back on as one of the first people that looked at productivity as an actual business asset. And he had this fantastic quote, and it goes like this: "If you can't explain what you're doing as a process, you probably don't know what you're doing." If you can't explain what you are doing as a process, you probably don't know what you're doing. The implications of this statement are rather huge. If you can't describe getting a student up to an advanced level as a process, or if you can't do it with consistency with all of your students, or with students of varying intensity levels, you might have a casual student who barely practices, you might have a really intense student. If you can't find a way or describe a way to get both of those students to be really good at sight reading or note reading without outside help, or you have a spotty record of varying levels of intensity equaling varying levels of success in the back end, then you probably don't know what you're doing. Now, this is a mildly offensive statement. What I will tell you is that I'm going to point to myself first as the chief offender of this. When I began to realize in my studio that I was really dependent on parental involvement to get the kind of outcome that I wanted, I began to realize that I had actually given my power away as a business owner, that I was letting my customers influence the quality of the product. And when I took ownership of that, it was a lot. It was a huge revelation to me that I actually even could take ownership. But when I did take ownership of it, it changed my business results, and I was actually a lot happier in my job and a lot happier in my role as business owner. Now, that's just one way of looking at that. The processes that exist in your studio should be documented. And this is what I was getting at earlier when I said that I sat down with a business consultant and he blew my mind in terms of helping me realize exactly what I was leaving on the table. He helped me realize why I was having trouble scaling not only my studio business, but other ventures that I was involved in. I'm not going to get into it too much, but I'm involved in a curriculum business and things of that nature. What I'd like you to take away from this, the insight I'd like you to take away, is that when you think about scaling, if you think about taking your music studio to the next size, or an order of a magnitude higher, like 10x, oftentimes when I talk to studio owners who want to do that, or school owners who have 150 but want to go to 500 or 1,000, they don't realize the lengths that they're going to have to go in automating and using processes to make that growth happen. They're not fully prepared for what that means. And this is what I did personally in my studio so that I could completely offload everything. I hinted at this last week. I'm actually going to tell you today. What I did was I sat down and I sketched out every system that was in my business: invoicing, enrollment, communications, registration, scheduling, rescheduling, makeup lessons, the studio calendar, how I kept track of who owed what. Every single thing that required my input, I sketched that out, and then I asked myself how much of myself is present in that process. When I look at what people owe, like they owe for books or they owe for this event that we participated in terms of money, how much of that is existing in my head? How much of that is dependent on information that isn't written down somewhere? And what I realized was that the reason I couldn't scale, the reason I couldn't trust handing my studio off or the administration of my studio off to another person, to an assistant or to an office manager, was because all of that stuff existed here, or it required in some way my presence. And what I had to do, and this is scary, and I fully admit that this is true, but what I had to do to get over the hump, what I had to do to remove myself from the business, was I actually had to destroy the systems that were working for me, in some cases systems that have been working for 10 years, and rebuild things from scratch so that I wasn't present in them anymore. Good example of that. The way that I used to do scheduling was that I just had a spreadsheet that existed on my computer, and invoicing was kind of wasn't tied to that. And what I had to do was scrap that system, go to something digital, go to something automated. Thanks, Ruth. I see you there. What I had to do was go to something automated that someone else could be involved in. And it's to the point now where invoicing happens without me at all. I had to change the way that I did book costs. And I went to a system where at the beginning of the year, at the beginning of the school year, I charged a general book fee to everyone in the studio so that I didn't have to keep track anymore. And I made it roughly what people had paid, the average amount that people had paid over the last year. I had an equation and a formula to know what that cost should be. But because I charged that up front at the beginning of the year, I have not had to think, or I did not have to think and still don't have to think about just taking a book off the shelf and handing it to a student. And if one student really goes through their books really fast and covers more books than what they paid for, that isn't going to happen that often. And if it does, good for them, right? I'm not going to be worried about it too much. By and large, about what people pay for in that book cost at the beginning of the year is about what they use. And if it's a little bit under, I might credit them for the next year. If it's a little bit over, I'll just come to that parent and say, we're going to add $12 to next year's fee because little Johnny here got through his book so fast. But what was so important about that was that wasn't a communication point that I then had to communicate to my office manager. We didn't have to think about it anymore. She's not here. She's not here in my studio. She doesn't know when I hand a book off the shelf. And that piece of communication would drag me down. And if I was trying to scale to 1,000 students, it might work for the number of students I have. It might work in your studio if you're at 100 or 50. But if you aspire to be at 500 or 750 or 1,000, and you're having to keep track one by one of all the books you're handing off your shelf, it's just not going to work. And so for me, and again, I'm just going to summarize the point here. For me, It was getting everything out of my head onto paper, evaluating if I still had to be involved, and then destroying systems that worked and replacing them with ones that didn't require my presence or weren't dependent on my personality or weren't dependent on the experience I had. And that's a tough thing. So a provocative question for larger studios, or honestly for any studio: could you leave your studio for a month and it worked just fine? More or less. If you had someone to sub for you, if you broke your arm or had a surgery and you needed a little recuperation time, could you call in another teacher, have them sub for you, pay that teacher obviously, and if you had an office manager, an assistant that was working for you 5 hours a week, maybe at $10 or $15 an hour, could they run that together based on the stuff that you've written down about how you do education, how you do invoicing, how you do parent communications? If you can't, you're not at the place where systems are working for you. And the way that this is a driver of studio growth is it takes your mind off the business. It hands it to someone else. You can take the time that you've saved and invest it into something else that's a higher dollar per hour result for you. That is how it's a driver. And if you look at all those processes I mentioned earlier, and you can improve those processes by 20% or 50% or 100%, saving time, finding ways to increase money because you have a great marketing system that's duplicatable, or you hand marketing off to an assistant. If you can do that, this drives revenue, this drives growth, this drives student increase, this drives customer satisfaction, and overall just drives more happiness for you and your business. And I think that's incredibly important. Moving on. The ninth driver is a little more conceptual. And I saved it for last because I think it might be the driver that unlocks the other 9. So the other 9 that we went through, or the other 8 that we went through, were drivers of studio growth were marketing, strategy, assets, your business model, your relationships, how you distribution or your list of your network, or how you get customers, products. 7th was processes. We talked about that or today. The 9th one is ideology. And what I mean by that is your belief system. What you believe is possibly the most important driver of all of these, because if you look at those other categories and you have a belief that is falsely limiting you, you're not going to excel there. If you heard me say just a minute ago, could you leave your studio for a month and it run on its own, and you think in your head, oh, that's not possible, that's going to limit you in that category. I've been talking about AdWords on my blog for well over a year now, going on 2 years soon, and talking about how it is such a huge driver of growth. And yet every week I see comments made in piano teacher Facebook groups. I hear people talk to me in the context of a coaching conversation, or maybe they're considering that, and they're saying, oh yeah, I tried AdWords, it didn't work for me. Or, Facebook ads, it's too expensive. Any place where you're telling yourself that it's not possible, if you have a belief, if you're telling a story to yourself about one of these categories that's falsely limiting you, that actually means that you have capped your effectiveness in that category. And this is going to slow down your growth, stop it completely, or in a worst case scenario, it's going to shut you down, possibly for good. So, I'll just say it. You're not going to move farther than what you believe is possible. And this is the base level, the foundational reason why you're stuck in anything. In any place that I felt stuck in the past, including when I moved to have an office manager for my studio, I was stuck because I could not imagine what it would be like to actually trust someone to invoice for me. And therefore, here I was spending hours every month chasing people down for money, making my own invoices, trying to keep track of books, ordering my own books from the company, wrote it all down, handed it off to someone, bam, there it is. Now, there's a little bit more than just writing it down. There's actually an entire process that I've learned from this consultant that made it, there was no trial and error. I went straight from not doing this to having these processes created and writing them and co-writing them with the assistant that I was working with, to immediately going into incredible effectiveness. The speed with which I handed off the administration of my studio was kind of astonishing and breathtaking, simply because this process itself was so good. And I don't have time to get into that here, but what I'm saying is that had I not believed it possible, once I finally got past the belief that it wasn't possible, what changed for me almost immediately was truly awesome. So here's a couple of ways you could be stuck. You could believe it's possible for others. So let's go back to the AdWords thing. You could believe that it's possible for others, but not for yourself. Or you might not believe that you have the talent or skills necessary to make it happen. Or maybe you don't believe that it'll work in your area. So you're just telling yourself, oh, AdWords might work for Daniel, but you know what? He's in a suburb. Surely it won't work in a city. Meanwhile, someone in a city who's having great success is laughing all the way to the bank. Not necessarily at your expense, but unfortunately at your expense you don't believe it to be true, and therefore you're not taking full advantage of what you could be. I will tell you, this is your brain's way of keeping you poor, broke, and in some cases depressed. I've seen some really sad stuff, again, in piano teacher Facebook groups or in conversations with people where they truly believe that they're stuck and they can't get unstuck, and they truly believe that things that have been working for me for years, or I've seen working for other teachers, it's not just me, I'm not saying I'm some kind of special person, but things that are working, they're just saying, I can't do that, I'm not good enough, I don't deserve it. Maybe it won't work where I live. Oh, I'm in the country. Oh, I'm in the city. Oh, I'm in the suburbs. Won't work here. Oh, parents are much more picky here. Oh, sports are huge here. No one cares about music anymore. Kids these days. All these are beliefs in your mind. They're holding you back. And what I would say is you lose these beliefs, you move forward. This is how the ninth belief, your belief of ideology, is going to transform what you do. And it's going to be that master driver of growth that drives all those other ones. So, once you've activated your imagination, these things begin to change for you. The question then would be, and I'm going to end with this, how can you stretch yourself? And I will tell you, there's ways that I've done it. There's ways I've seen other people do it. I mentioned this, I think, in the second or third video in this series. I said, read books, stretch your imagination there. Tim Ferriss, I don't know if you know who he is, but Tim Ferriss is a podcaster. He's written several New York Times bestsellers. He's kind of a savant, polymath, a jack of all trades. And he has this great quote that he picked up, and I'm not even sure where he picked it up from, but I heard it first from him, that you're the average of the 5 people you hang around. And if you find yourself around negative people who are telling you things can't be done, or they're small-minded, or they don't know your business and they're telling you it can't be done in your business, chances are you're probably going to believe that. Oddly enough, they've done studies on this, and they say that your income is the average of the 5 people you hang around. I find that very fascinating too, and I will tell you that I've seen that be true in my life as well. Statistics are statistics for a reason. Oftentimes, more or less, they're true. So there's that. I'll say this without apology, get a coach. The only reason I say this isn't because I'm one, it's because that was a huge critical factor of success in my career, and still is, because I still retain the services of a coach. I won't spend much more time on that. And then the Will Smith quote. I love this quote, and this really goes to what I was saying here about your beliefs holding you back. And I'll pretty much end with this, that Will Smith has this great quote. I'm going to read it right here. He was talking about this in terms of his work ethic and what he was willing to do to excel and succeed at whatever he found himself doing, whether that was in his acting career, in his music career, what he was doing in high school when he was in his formative years. He said this: you may be smarter than me, you may be more talented than me, and you may have more natural ability than me. However, if there's a treadmill and we get on that treadmill, one of 2 things is going to happen. Either you're going to get off first, or I'm going to die running. And what I take from this, and I love this quote, is that you cannot quit. never can quit. You cannot quit. When I first did AdWords, it was a year before I really saw results. And I had no mentor. At the time, I didn't know a single studio. I'm sure there were studios doing it, but at the time, no single teacher studio that I knew of was doing it. To this day, most single teacher studios aren't using it. It's a lot more common in larger music schools and music studios now, but even at the time, that was kind of forward thinking for music studios and music schools. People just weren't thinking about it back when I started doing this. And I thought maybe I was a little stupid or a little crazy for doing it, but I jumped out on faith. I did it anyway. And the first 6 months, really didn't see a return from it at all. I was tweaking with it, wondering why it wasn't working. In some cases, I found out that I didn't even know how to turn the ads on. So I wasn't losing money. I wasn't even showing my ads because I didn't know how to work the interface. Kept trying. Slowly began to see a trickle of results, which then turned into a steady stream of new contacts, which then turned into a flood of contacts. And I know I've mentioned this before, and I don't want to bore people with this statistic, but even over the last 20 months, I have seen almost 300 people contact my studio because of AdWords. Almost 300 because of AdWords. And it's barely costing me $2,000 a year. And the number of students that I get, I can be extremely picky, I can be extremely choosy. But if I'd quit in that first year that was really hard, if I'd quit the first time that I had tried postcards, if I'd quit the first time that I'd tried a website and the website really wasn't working that well for me, if I'd quit, I wouldn't be standing here today, and I wouldn't have the career, I wouldn't have the enjoyment that I get out of my career today. And so what I would just say to you is that you cannot quit. Once you get on that treadmill, you have to stay on it. You are not going to be the only teacher in the world or the only studio owner in the world that didn't get Facebook ads to work for their studio. You're not going to be the only studio owner in the world that didn't get AdWords to work for your studio, or this thing, or whatever's coming down the pike next. Be forward thinking, get on the treadmill, stay there until you die. So that's where I'm going to end it. Now, one final thought about all 9 of these. I'm going to read them off again. The 9 drivers: marketing, strategy, assets, business model, relationships, distribution, products, processes, and ideology or your belief system. What would happen in 2018 if you increased the effectiveness of yourself in one way in 9 of those areas? So you tried one new marketing approach, or you double down on the one that you already have and you get more consistent at it. Maybe you already have one that more or less works for you, but you've just gotten lazy or gotten busy and haven't even been working on an approach that's working. You haven't even been working it all that much. You've been sporadic. What happened if you got really dedicated, or you found a marketing approach or a new marketing approach that really, really worked for you and you went all in on that? What if you really looked at your strategy for the year and actually maybe even devised one? What if you looked at your business model? What if you added another product line to your studio? I talked about that when I was at the IMA the other day and I was shooting outside. What would happen if you added 2 tiers of service in your studio where you had a premium program and a casual program? As I mentioned at that time, if you offer an upsell to people, the statistic is usually 30 to 35% of people, if it's marketed well, 30 to 35% of people will take that upsell. That is possibly a 35% increase in revenue that you could have this year if you would just add a second tier for more committed families. What if you added group lessons? What if you added products on top of your main lesson program? And again, you can go back and watch that video. There was a lot of good ideas there. All I'm saying is that I'm hoping that what I've said here in these 9 categories, these 9 ways to increase revenue, to increase students, to increase growth, I'm hoping that these can be a jumping off point of creativity for you. Hope that it's challenging your thinking, and I'm hoping that it's putting you on a path toward an incredibly productive 2018. So, with that, we are done with this series, and I'm pretty much done for the video for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you have questions, if you want to follow up on anything I've said here, leave a comment below. If you like this video, I would love for you to share it maybe in one of the Piano Teacher Facebook groups if you think it could be helpful for folks. And I'll definitely go into the comments and answer any questions you might have there. And if you have a question you'd like me to ask, now that I've completed this particular series, I'm just kind of going back to doing videos about whatever I happen to be thinking about on that day. But if you have a question you'd like me to answer that would be useful for you, just leave it in the comments below, and I will answer that in a future video. And thanks again so much for watching. and I'll see you tomorrow. The last one I'm going to do before Christmas. So catch you later. Bye-bye.